Be me. Nancy, 32 years old, project manager at a mid-sized tech company. By all the metrics I used to measure my life, I was successful. I had a great career, climbing the ladder faster than most of my peers, owned my own condo in a decent part of the city, financially independent, sharp, and, according to my friends, a force to be reckoned with. But there was a gaping hole in my life that no promotion or well-managed project could fill. I was profoundly, deeply alone. It wasn't for a lack of trying. I was on all the apps. I'd let my friends set me up. Every single attempt at dating for the past 5 years had ended in the exact same way, a spectacular crash and burn. It always started well enough. A match, some witty banter over text. He'd seem normal, interesting even. Then we'd meet for a drink, and the real me would come out. I remember one date in particular, a few months before everything changed. His name was Mark, worked in finance, seemed nice enough. We're sitting in a bar, and he's telling me about a challenging deal he just closed. He's proud of it. I can see the genuine excitement in his eyes. Instead of congratulating him, my brain just kicks into autopilot. I started explaining how the aggressive, competitive nature of the financial sector is a direct byproduct of toxic masculinity. I told him that his win was likely built on the exploitation of a system designed by men for men. The light in his eyes just went out. It was like watching a candle get snuffed. He tried to change the subject, asking what I did for fun. I told him my main hobby was activism, specifically deconstructing patriarchal power structures online. He just nodded slowly, took a long sip of his beer, and said he needed to use the restroom. He never came back. Left me with the bill. That was my life. A repeating loop of me turning potential connections into ideological lectures. My social media was a reflection of my real-life persona. It was a curated wall of infographics about the wage gap, retweets of articles about benevolent sexism, and long, angry threads calling out problematic behavior in movies and TV shows. My friends, all of whom shared my worldview, would cheer me on. "You go, girl. Speak truth to power." But their encouragement felt hollow when I was sitting alone in my perfectly decorated condo on a Friday night, scrolling through pictures of their happy family vacations. I had built a fortress of righteousness around myself, and I was its only prisoner. My work life was no different. I was efficient and good at my job, but I viewed my male colleagues through a lens of deep suspicion. If a man repeated my idea in a meeting, he was repeating and stealing my credit. If he tried to explain a technical concept to me, he was mansplaining. If he held the door open for me, he was performing an act of benevolent sexism, subtly implying I was weak. I was constantly on guard, cataloging microaggressions, ready for a fight that only I was participating in. The men in my office mostly just gave me a wide berth. They were polite but distant. They collaborated with me when necessary, but there was no warmth, no camaraderie. I told myself it was because they were intimidated by a strong woman. The truth, I think, is that they were just tired. The breaking point came on a random Tuesday. I was on the phone with my old friend, Edward. He's a psychologist, a calm, rational guy I'd known since we were kids. I was in the middle of a full-blown rant, pacing my living room with a glass of wine. The subject was the utter hopelessness of modern dating and how men were emotionally stunted creatures incapable of genuine partnership. I went on for a solid 10 minutes, laying out my thesis with the passion of a prosecuting attorney. When I finally ran out of steam, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Edward didn't argue. He just asked, "Nancy, are you happy?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I stopped pacing. "Of course I'm not happy, Edward. That's what I've been telling you. He was quiet for another moment. You have a very specific strategy for interacting with half the human population, he said gently. It's based on critique, suspicion, and the assumption of negative intent. You've been running this strategy for years. How's it working out for you? I started to get defensive, launching into another speech about systemic issues. He cut me off, which he never did. I'm not talking about systems, Nancy. I'm talking about you in your day-to-day life, with the man who makes your coffee, the man who sits in the cubicle next to you, the man who asks you out for a drink. I didn't know what to say. I want to propose an experiment, he said, just for 30 days, a behavioral experiment. What kind of experiment? I asked, my voice dripping with suspicion. For the next 30 days, you are forbidden from criticizing men. No lectures, no call-outs, no correcting, no eye-rolling, not out loud and not in your head. I laughed. That's impossible. That's my entire personality. I know, he said. That's the first part. Here's the second. For every man, you have a meaningful interaction with each day, a colleague, a barista, a guy on a date. You have to find one genuine, honest thing to praise or compliment them on. I was speechless. The suggestion was so offensive, so counter to everything I believed, that I couldn't form a coherent response. Praise them? For what? For upholding the patriarchy? It's insane, Edward. It's like asking me to thank a burglar for only stealing my TV. Is the barista a burglar, Nancy? Is Kenneth from your programming team a burglar? He countered. You're seeing a monolith, an enemy army. I'm asking you to see individuals. For 30 days. What do you have to lose? Your current method has already led you to where you are now, successful, righteous, and utterly miserable. His words hung in the air. Miserable. He was right. I hated him for being right. I argued with him for another 20 minutes, but my heart wasn't in it. His logic was a pinprick in the giant balloon of my ideology. Fine, I finally snapped. 30 days. But this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Great, he said, completely unfazed. Day 1 starts tomorrow. Call me in a month. I hung up the phone, feeling a toxic mix of anger and dread. This was going to be the longest month of my life. The first day of the experiment felt like walking through a minefield. My morning routine involved a stop at a little coffee shop near my office. The barista was a young guy, always looked tired, kind of scruffy. We had a purely transactional relationship. I'd state my overly complicated order, he'd grunt, I'd tap my card, he'd shove the cup at me. This morning, as he handed me my latte, I took a deep breath. My mind was racing, trying to find something to say that wasn't a lie. His latte art was non-existent. He wasn't particularly friendly, but he was fast. Hey, I said, my voice feeling foreign in my own mouth. I just wanted to say, you make coffee faster than anyone I've ever seen. It's really impressive how efficient you are in the morning rush. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me. Not at my chest, not over my shoulder, but right at me. He blinked a couple of times, as if he didn't understand the words. A slow smile spread across his face. Oh, thanks. I try. The next morning, when I came in, he smiled at me. The usual? He asked. And when he handed me the cup, there was a wobbly, malformed heart drawn in the foam. It felt weird, unsettlingly nice. Later that first week, I was leaving the office. The security guard at the front desk, an older man named George, who I'd never spoken to, beyond a curt nod, wished me a good evening. Normally, I'd just ignore him or grunt back. The experiment. Right. I stopped. You know, George, I really appreciate that you're always here. It feels safer knowing you're always so alert and present at the desk. He looked as shocked as the barista had. He straightened his tie and stood up a little taller. "Just doing my job, Ms. Nancy." "But thank you. That means a lot." From that day on, George always greeted me with a huge smile and a "Have a wonderful day, Ms. Nancy." The real test came at the office. There's a guy in our marketing department, David. Nice enough, but very much a corporate peacock. Always in a perfectly tailored suit or blazer. I'd always internally mocked him for it. Classic male vanity. He walked past my desk on the way to a meeting, and I saw my chance. It felt like jumping into cold water. "David," I called out. He stopped. "That's a really sharp blazer. The color is great on you." He literally froze for a second. He looked down at his jacket, then back at me. A look of genuine confusion on his face. He probably thought it was the prelude to some sarcastic feminist critique. "Oh, thank you, Nancy. I appreciate that." He walked away, but there was a different energy about him, a little bounce in his step. An hour later, he walked by my desk again and placed a cup of coffee on it without a word. Just set it down, gave me a small nod, and kept walking. I stared at the coffee for a full 5 minutes. What was happening? This wasn't in any of my textbooks or theory blogs. This was simple cause and effect. A small positive action resulted in a small positive reaction. It was so basic, it felt revolutionary. The second week, I decided to get bolder. Kenneth is one of our senior back-end developers. He's a legitimate genius, but he's also painfully shy and socially awkward. He rarely speaks in meetings, and when he does, he mumbles and stares at his shoes. I'd always found him frustrating to work with. I had to drag information out of him. I'd labeled him as just another guy with poor communication skills who expected women to do all the emotional labor of managing a conversation. We were in a project review meeting, and we'd hit a major roadblock. A database issue was threatening to delay a major launch by weeks. Everyone was throwing out complicated, expensive solutions. Then, Kenneth cleared his throat. In a barely audible voice, he mumbled a few sentences about re-indexing a specific set of tables and creating a temporary cache. The room was silent. Our tech lead's eyes went wide. It was a brilliant, elegant solution that would save us weeks of work and thousands of dollars. The old me would have just nodded and moved on, happy the problem was solved. But the experiment was in my head. I spoke up. "Kenneth, that's not just a good idea. It's an incredible idea. The way you approach that problem from a completely different angle is seriously brilliant. I would have never thought of that." I made sure to say it clearly, looking directly at him. The entire room turned to look at him. A deep beet-red blush crept up his neck and consumed his entire face. He looked down at the table, but I could see a small, hesitant smile on his lips. For the rest of the meeting, he sat up straighter. Later that afternoon, I got an instant message from him. "Hey, thanks for what you said in the meeting." I replied, "You earned it. It was a great idea." There was a pause. Then, "I was looking at the project plan for your upcoming feature launch. I noticed a potential bottleneck in the AP I call your planning. There's a much more efficient way to do it. Do you have 15 minutes for me to show you? It could save your team a few days of work." I stared at the message. Kenneth had never, in the 3 years I'd worked with him, proactively offered help or advice. He always did what was asked, no more, no less. I walked over to his desk. He spent the next 20 minutes enthusiastically drawing diagrams on a whiteboard, explaining the intricacies of his solution. He was animated, passionate, and articulate. He wasn't a poor communicator. He just needed to feel that his contribution was seen and valued before he felt safe enough to share it. That single compliment had unlocked a side of him I never knew existed, and it had saved my project from a potential delay. I went back to my desk, feeling dizzy. This experiment was supposed to be a humiliating exercise in biting my tongue. Instead, it was making my life easier. By the start of week 3, something had fundamentally shifted. The office atmosphere felt different. Or rather, my experience of it felt different. The men I worked with were no longer a collective of potential antagonists. They were just people. They were David, who had a flair for fashion. They were Kenneth, the shy genius. They were George, the diligent security guard. My default state of antagonism was melting away, being replaced by a hesitant curiosity. The constant low-level stress I carried in my shoulders started to dissipate. I wasn't spending all my energy scanning for slights and offenses anymore. It was exhausting being a warrior all the time. I hadn't realized how heavy my armor was until I started taking it off, piece by piece. My friend, the same one who usually celebrated my angry feminist rants, noticed the change. "You seem calmer," she said over lunch. I didn't tell her about the experiment. I was too embarrassed. I just shrugged and said I was trying a new mindfulness app. She then told me she had someone she wanted me to meet. "Don't say no immediately," she pleaded. "He's a good guy. An architect. Smart, kind, normal. Please just give him one chance." The old me would have given her a 10-minute lecture on the oppressive nature of heteronormative dating rituals and the emotional labor women are expected to perform. The new, experimental me heard Edward's voice in my head. "What do you have to lose?" I sighed. "Okay, fine. One drink." That weekend, I found myself sitting across from him in a quiet little wine bar. His name was Ethan. He was normal. Not movie star handsome, but he had kind eyes and a warm smile. He was a little nervous. I was terrified. I had my old scripts running through my head, a checklist of red flags to watch for. He chose the place. Okay, a bit generic, probably a default date spot. Strike one. He complimented my dress. Okay, focusing on my appearance. Strike two. He started talking about his work. Okay, monopolizing the conversation. Strike three. My brain was screaming at me to unleash the lecture, to deconstruct his every move until he fled like all the others. But the rules of the experiment were clear. No criticism. Find something to praise. I took a deep breath, pushing back against years of ingrained behavior. He finished a story about a challenging building design he was working on. I looked around the bar. It was cozy, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. It wasn't loud or crowded. "You know," I said, and his eyes snapped to mine, probably bracing for impact. "You picked a really great place. It's so comfortable and quiet here. It's nice not to have to shout on a first date." It was like I had flipped a switch. His entire posture changed. He relaxed. He broke into a wide, genuine grin. "Oh, good. I'm so glad you like it. I spent like an hour looking for a place that wasn't a total madhouse." That one simple compliment diffused all the tension in the air. The date completely transformed. The rest of the date with Ethan was unlike any I'd had in my adult life. Because I had disarmed myself, he disarmed himself in return. There was no debate, no ideological sparring. There was just conversation. I found myself asking questions. Not loaded questions designed to trap him, but genuine questions. What got him into architecture? What was the most challenging project he ever worked on? What did he like to do when he wasn't designing buildings? And I actually listened to the answers. I learned that he got into architecture because he loved the idea of creating spaces that made people feel safe and comfortable. He'd spent a year volunteering to build houses in a developing country. He told a hilarious, self-deprecating story about his first ever solo project, which involved a misplaced supporting wall and a very angry client. Instead of analyzing the story for problematic themes, I just laughed. It was a funny story. At one point, he asked me about my work. I started to describe a difficult project I was managing. The old me would have framed it around the incompetence of my male colleagues. Instead, I found myself talking about the challenge of the project itself, the logistics, the problem solving. I even mentioned how Kenneth, our developer, had come up with a brilliant solution that saved us. I heard myself say, "He's incredibly smart. We're lucky to have him." Ethan was completely engaged. He was nodding, asking follow-up questions. He wasn't threatened or bored. He was interested. When the evening was over, he walked me to my street. There was none of the usual end-of-date awkwardness. "I had a really, really great time tonight, Nancy," he said, and it sounded completely sincere. "Me too," I replied, shocked to realize I meant it. He smiled. "I'd love to do this again, if you're interested." And for the first time in what felt like a decade, I said yes, without a single reservation. The final week of the experiment felt like I was living in a different reality. The changes that had started as small ripples were now a full-blown tide. My relationship with my team at work had completely transformed. Projects were running more smoothly than ever before. Why? Because I wasn't fighting everyone anymore. When I needed something from Kenneth, I'd start by saying, "Hey, your work on the last phase was a lifesaver. I have another challenge for you." And he'd eagerly jump in. When David from marketing presented a new campaign, I'd find something to praise: the clever copy, the smart targeting, before I offered any constructive feedback. As a result, he'd listen to my feedback without getting defensive. I was getting more done, with less friction and with far less stress. I had spent years believing that being a strong woman in the workplace meant being a warrior, constantly fighting for my place at the table. I was starting to see that true strength wasn't about being the loudest or most critical person in the room. It was about being able to build people up, to foster collaboration, and to lead with encouragement instead of fear. My praise wasn't an act of submission. It was a strategic tool, a ridiculously effective one. Ethan called the next day. We went on a second date. We went to a museum. We went on a third date. We went for a long walk in the park. He was consistent, kind, and funny. He made plans. He texted to say good morning. He remembered little details from our conversations. He wasn't perfect. He had his quirks. He was a terrible singer and had a weird obsession with historical documentaries. But he was a good man. And because I wasn't constantly scanning him for flaws, I was actually able to see him for who he was. During one of our dates, I told him vaguely about how I used to be more intense, more cynical. He just nodded. "Well, I'm glad I met the version I met," he said. "She's pretty great." And I almost cried, right there in the middle of a crowded restaurant. No one had called me great in a long time. They called me strong, smart, fierce, but never just great. The 30 days came to an end on a Thursday. I remembered it because Edward had said, "Call me in a month." I didn't call him. I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. I needed to process it myself. That weekend, Ethan was out of town visiting his family. I was alone in my condo, but it was different now. The silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat down at my laptop, and for some reason, I decided to look at my social media history. I scrolled back, past the pictures of my recent, happier-looking lunches with colleagues, past the memes that were more lighthearted. I scrolled back a month, 2 months, a year, and then I saw her, the old Nancy. My screen was filled with her voice, a long, furious thread about how a male actor in an interview had interrupted his female co-star, a shared article titled "Why All Men Are Complicit in the Patriarchy." A meme showing a man offering a woman a coat with the caption, "I don't need your chivalry. I need you to dismantle your privilege." A screenshot of a dating app conversation where I had systematically torn apart a guy's profile, correcting his grammar and calling him a cliché, all under the guise of educating him. I had been so proud of that post. So many of my friends had liked it, commented with fire emojis. "Slay, Queen." I read it now, and my stomach churned. The man hadn't been aggressive. He just said, "Hey, you have a beautiful smile." And I had replied with a 3-paragraph essay on the unsolicited objectification of women's bodies. I kept scrolling, post after post of anger, resentment, and bitterness. A highlight reel of my own toxicity. I saw a picture of myself at a protest, holding a sign that said, "The future is female." I used to love that picture. Now, I looked at the woman holding the sign. I saw the anger in her eyes, the hard set of her jaw. I saw how lonely she was. I saw that she wasn't fighting for a better future. She was just fighting. Period. She was addicted to the conflict, to the feeling of being right, of being morally superior. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. My ideology wasn't a framework for understanding the world. It was a shield I used to protect myself from the world. If all men were potential threats, I never had to risk being vulnerable. If all interactions were a power struggle, I never had to risk being soft. If I could find a flaw in everyone, I never had to worry about them finding the flaws in me. It was the perfect defense mechanism, and it had cost me everything. It had cost me warmth, connection, joy, and years of my life. Men weren't running from me because they were intimidated by my strength. They were running from me because I was relentlessly, exhaustingly unpleasant. They were running because I met every attempt at connection with a wall of suspicion and every kind word with a lecture. They weren't the problem. The way I was treating them was the problem. I had demanded respect from the world while offering none in return. I had screamed about wanting empathy while demonstrating none myself. I thought I was a warrior for a cause. In reality, I was just a bully. The realization didn't just break me, it shattered me. It shattered the persona I had spent a decade building. It shattered the worldview that had made me feel safe and righteous in my isolation. I sat there in front of my glowing screen and I cried. I cried for the men I had belittled on dates. I cried for the colleagues I had treated with contempt. I cried for the years I had wasted being angry at an enemy that existed mostly in my own head. And I cried for that lonely, furious woman in the picture, because she had been in so much pain and had no idea how to fix it. After a long time, I stopped crying. I took a sip of my wine. And then I started deleting. I deleted the thread about the actor. I deleted the screenshot of the dating app conversation. I deleted the angry rants and the bitter memes. One by one, I erased the digital monument I had built to my own misery. It felt like cleaning out a wound. It was painful, but it was necessary. As I was about to close the laptop, a notification popped up on my screen. A message from Ethan. It was a picture of a sunset from his parents' backyard. "Thinking of you. Can't wait to see you when I'm back." I looked at the picture and then back at my now empty social media timeline. It was a blank slate, a new beginning. I did eventually call Edward. I told him everything. He just listened. When I was done, all he said was, "It sounds like you didn't just learn how to talk to men, Nancy. It sounds like you learned how to talk to people." He was right. The experiment wasn't about men. Not really. It was about me. It forced me to stop seeing labels and start seeing human beings, each of them carrying their own hopes and insecurities. It taught me that everyone, no matter who they are, is starved for a little bit of recognition, a little bit of praise, A kind word costs nothing, but it can change everything. The result of my experiment didn't just get me a boyfriend. It gave me back my life. It gave me better relationships at work. It made me a calmer, more patient, and more empathetic person. It didn't just break me. It broke me open. I'm 32, and for the first time in my life, I feel not right, but happy.